Hello, I'm Richard Eger, host of Capital Outlook. Earlier today, Governor Matt Mead delivered his third State of the State address. We'll have some analysis and reaction to that later in the program, but first, the Governor's address. From the House Chamber at the Wyoming State Capitol, Wyoming PBS presents the Governor's State of the State Address.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please, thank you. Very nice. Thank you. Please be, thank you. I am honored. I know that was to help shorten up my speech, but it will not work. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, members of the 62nd Wyoming Legislature, Secretary Maxfield, Auditor Cloud, Superintendent Hill, Chief Justice Kite, and members of the state and federal judiciary, citizens of Wyoming, all military members, all veterans, good morning. And a great special good morning to and a welcome to our new treasurer, Mark Gordon. Mark, you take the place of Joe Meyer, who was a dear friend to all of us and all of Wyoming. Joe, we miss you. And Mark, we look forward to your good work. And on a personal note, a good morning to my wife Carol and my kids. We have a 50-50 chance that they actually have an excused absence today. We began 2013 with optimism. With this new legislature, our 62nd, we have another opportunity to work on the 2013-14 budget and other significant issues that we face. We have the opportunity to take steps to position our state well for boom or non-boom times. We should build savings, reduce the standard budget, cut the size of government and streamline state regulations, decide on the funding mechanism for our highways, change some fiscal policies, and provide funding for major items such as wildfire expenses, landfills, assistance to local government, the Gillette-Madison Water Project, the UW School of Engineering, and recognition of employee performance, to name a few. Unlike the federal government, we will continue to live within our means. We will keep our budget as flat as possible, not doubling every 10 years as it did the past decade. We will fund important items that position Wyoming well for the future, but always draw the line on overspending. There will be difficult decisions, to be sure, but what we do this session is all about progress for our state, not about our personal popularity. By making the difficult decisions, we have a chance to leave a better legacy for Wyoming. Whatever decisions we make this session, we are in the best place to make them. And ladies and gentlemen, that is because I am pleased to report the state of the state is strong. Now that's a simple but significant observation. The state of our state is strong. We are fortunate to be able to say that because I can assure you, as I talk to governors from around the country, not everyone can. We are thankful for our energy resources, our tourism, our agriculture, our natural treasures, our businesses, and our greatest strength, our citizens. Now, before I get further along, I would like to recognize some of the remarkable citizens that I've asked to be here with us today. We have representatives of the Northern Arapaho and the Eastern Shoshone tribes. I very much appreciate the close working relationship that I have with the tribes. We work with a shared recognition that the reservation faces many of the challenges and many opportunities as the rest of Wyoming. Our cordial relationship will benefit both the reservation and the state. The tribal members that are here, please stand so we may recognize you. One of the great blessings for me as being governor is to get to work with the men and women who serve in our Guard. And we never want to forget that these men and women are still being deployed overseas. I see them when they leave, and I try to be there when they get back. And I can tell you that as I have traveled on a couple occasions to where they work overseas, they serve in a way that brings great honor to our state and to our country. And we remember also that the Guard does great work here at home. 2 years ago, they had to fight floods all over the state. And by their work, they were able to prevent a lot of damage and even help in the saving of lives. The Guard distinguished itself last year in fighting fires. General Reiner, the Adjutant General of the Wyoming National Guard, please stand as we recognize you and all military members and all Guard members. Because the state and certainly this body and I recognize that education is one of our highest priorities. And we remember the key to education is great teachers, and that one teacher can make a positive difference in so many lives and in our society. It's appropriate this year, as I've done in previous years, to recognize their excellence. We have excellent teachers all over the state. And today we have with us Laura Drake. Laura is a third-grade teacher at Goins Elementary School in Cheyenne. She started her career in Campbell County 23 years ago and has taught 11 years at Goins. Laura is the 2013 Wyoming Teacher of the Year. Laura, please stand and let us congratulate you. Now, outstanding students go hand in glove with outstanding teachers. Felix Weiss, as a student at Graybell High School, received first place in mathematics at the 2012 Wyoming State Science Fair. His winning project was titled Frequency and Distribution of Permutational and Cyclic Primes. Now, I was going to explain that to you, but because I can't even say it, I'll leave that to Felix. Felix, I am certain you have mathematics, more mathematics in your future, and the opportunities lie ahead of you as a student at the University of Wyoming. Felix, thanks for doing a good job. Please stand and let us recognize you. Student, and now I'd like to talk about our great university. I'm pleased to have the president of the university with us today, Tom Buchanan. Tom is retiring after a long and successful career at the university. During his tenure, we have seen amazing strengthening of UW. We have outreach to community colleges at an unprecedented level. He has built areas of distinction in energy, the arts, and business. I observe watching the president. It's a very, very difficult job, but that one that Tom, with his wife Jackie, accomplished with great dedication and skill for the benefit of all the students in all of Wyoming. Tom, please stand as we thank you for your dedication to UW. Tom, I would note that our basketball teams over there seem to be giving you a wonderful send-off. And I'm even made more aware of that as that we've had people down our office early this morning asking for tickets. We appreciate all that UW has to offer, as well as our great community colleges. We recognize in Wyoming the importance of higher education, whether it is a 4-year or a 2-year degree. And we also recognize the value of career and technical education. I would like to recognize those with technical ed training who roll up their sleeves every day to do the hard work. we too often take their contribution for granted. Our plumbers, welders, technicians, custodians, carpenters, heavy equipment operators, these are the people who do not always get the credit they deserve in building and maintaining Wyoming. Now, last year I was fortunate to have the opportunity to tour a coal mine in Campbell County, and I talked to several of the coal miners, including an incredible woman who drove me in a truck as big as a house, literally. She told me how proud she is to work in a coal mine, to be able to provide for her family, and to be able to tell her kids that her work helps build Wyoming and powers the country, providing jobs for many others. Her story is not unique. It is the story of coal. And we're fortunate to have two people who represent coal mining here with us today, Nicole and John Japp. Collectively, they represent 45 years, roughly, of experience in mining. And I understand, Nicole, that her mother was a miner and that her daughter is a miner as well. They represent what coal brings to our country. They represent what coal brings to Wyoming, roughly $1 billion a year. They represent the fact that by their work, they help provide roughly 42% electricity to the country. They represent all that coal means to our country. Please join me in welcoming two people who keep us warm in the winter and cool in the summer, Nicole and John Japp. While they do that hard work, they also take care of 4 kids and 2 Irish wolfhounds. And I've thought about that. I'm not sure if the coal, the kids, or the wolfhounds take more attention, but they do it all very well, and we thank them for being here. Some of the very good news over the last 2 years is our exponential growth in broadband connectivity. Keeping and recruiting data centers and other high-tech companies. We have a supercomputer. We have a Microsoft data center under construction. And we have small and medium-sized tech companies popping up all over our state. You just don't have to look far to see that we have an emerging tech sector that will begin to diversify our economy and provide another option for our young people. One such company is Ptolemy Data Systems, which opened its 6,000 square foot data center facility in Sheridan last fall. The company is the brainchild of Ryan Mulholland. Tech is taking hold in Wyoming, and it's thanks to entrepreneurs like him. My broadband conference this past year was packed to the walls with amazing people just like Ryan. Ryan, please stand as we thank you and those in the tech company for what you do. Wyoming has struggled with the issue of suicide. My office and the Department of Health have been working to formulate a plan on how we can make improvements. And it's not easy. But one such person who's been leading the way in this effort is B.J. Ayers, the creator and executive director of Grace for Two Brothers Foundation. B.J. is a strong advocate for suicide prevention initiatives. She lost 2 sons to suicide, thus the creation of her foundation. She's recognized statewide as being an authority in suicide prevention. She does great things locally and across the state. BJ, we appreciate the courage you have shown, helping to prevent the tragedy of suicide. BJ, please stand as we thank you for your work. So when I say the state of the state is strong, it is more than dollars and cents. It's because of tremendous people like I've just introduced to you this morning. We are small in population, but we are big in talent. We are big in potential, and we know that our people are Wyoming's very best resource. On November 30th, I submitted my supplemental budget for fiscal year 2014. It's a balanced budget and reflects the hard work of the state and agencies and legislative committees. State agencies had to come up with budget reductions at 4% per the legislature's request. I doubled that and asked for 8% reductions based upon falling natural gas prices. Based upon the reduced revenue forecast in January 2012, we had all hoped for the best, but we planned for the worst, and our efforts paid off. While the revenue forecast of October 2012 showed more revenue than previously forecast, largely due to capital gains and other investment income, our planning for budget reduction was timely, and here are some of the reasons. One, we incurred unexpected and major wildfire expenses during last year's severe fire season. We need to pay for the fires of 2012 and prepare for the next season. Two, we're losing $700 million in abandoned mine land money, which has been federally committed to Wyoming. With the U.S. Supreme Court's decision, implementation of the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act and associated costs are on the way. Additional reasons our cuts were timely. The standard budget has more than doubled over the last decade, and that's an unsustainable trajectory. There's uncertainty about the country's debt and deficit and how it will affect businesses, states, and individuals. Congress has failed to pass a budget in years. Uncertainty alone affects us. And if revenue fluctuations from the last few years teach us anything, it's that revenue, especially mineral prices, fluctuate, and we need to be ready. So caution is in order, and budget cuts are in order. Overall, I've recommended a reduction to the standard budget of over 6%. This reduces ongoing spending by over $60 million a year. I took it agency by agency, not an across-the-board cut. I wanted to try to lead by example, so my proposal has 10% reduction for the governor's office and the governor's residence. Not easy, but doable. Some state agencies have 8% reductions, some less. For community colleges and the University of Wyoming, the reduction is about 6%. My recommendations also reduce the size of government, eliminating 86 vacant positions. Regarding budget reductions, we know that some feel they are too deep, and we listen to those people that say so. And we also know that some feel they're not deep enough. Now, for those of you who feel more cuts are needed, this is the session, this is the time to weigh in, not with conceptual ideas, but with specific cuts to specific agencies and specific programs. I have made my recommendations, and I look forward to seeing your budget reductions, as well as what amount of the $20 million that I have left on the table is still available at the end of the session. I've recommended funding for a rules revision project aimed at reducing and simplifying the nearly 18,000 rules we have in Wyoming. We have far too many rules, too many regulations, and they continue to grow at an exponential rate. Too many rules are cumbersome, and they are not business-friendly. Some other highlights. As I mentioned above, we have the opportunity to reduce the standard budget in a very deliberate and considered way at a time when revenue is flat but stable and our state continues to grow. In fact, you may have noted that last year we were the fourth fastest growing state in the country. We face no immediate economic crisis. Therefore, this is the opportunity we should take, not miss. It is now the time to make cuts so that we will be prepared for what happens next, whatever it may be. My budget recommendation also includes $8.5 million for salary increases and $2.5 million for one-time merit-based bonuses for state employees, which includes UW and community college personnel. We implemented a new performance management system for the executive branch last year that I think is very good and still needs work. We've invested in the Hay study regarding compensation, and we want to keep the expertise in our state workforce, and we want to motivate the good achievers. I've also included $5 million to replenish the data center recruitment fund. We want to build on our success. I've asked for $5 million for the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust. We want to recognize the importance of conservation work. We want to recognize the value of balance, and we forever want to have ranching and farming a big part of our Wyoming landscape. If our state is a team, each community is an important player. To give our team, the state of Wyoming, the best future, each community should be strong. Therefore, I've recommended up to $25 million for local governments. To live up to the legislative commitment, I have asked for money for the completion of the Gillette-Madison Water Project, We want to encourage infrastructure development and communities planning for their future. I have also included up to $20 million for landfills, and if funds are available, up to $30 million for energy projects of a transformational nature. The source for the majority of these recommendations is 2013 capital gains income. This is one-time money, and these are one-time expenses. They will improve our future without growing our next budget. Last year, because of the rather gloomy revenue forecast, the Legislature had the foresight to reserve $150 million out of the rainy day fund. I recommend $60 million of that amount go to cover last year's fire expenses and prepare for this year. Taken all together, my budget recommendations leave about $19.8 million on the table, which is available for legislatively driven priorities. The Tier 1 School of Engineering at UW deserves special mention. The school offers a great opportunity for our state. It will include high-level programs to be integrated with the NZ STEM facility, the NCAR supercomputer, and the School of Energy Resources. I appointed a task force, an outstanding task force, to help me define what a Tier 1 school should look like. You'll see the report and note that they recommend building the school from the inside out, not the outside in. In other words, before a brick is placed, we must develop what happens inside the building to be able to compete with any university in this country or any university in this world in certain specialty areas. I thank the task force for their continued work, and as I am confident of their work, I have asked to build on the legislative initiative and have asked for significant money for the school. I've also asked for some fiscal policy changes. The Legislature has done yeoman's work over the years building a permanent mineral trust fund that now totals over $5 billion. Under our state constitution, 1.5% of that severance taxes must go into that fund. By what is a relatively new statute, and added 1% of severance taxes is directed to the Mineral Trust Fund. The Legislature can change the statute, and I propose now is the time. My proposal is for the statutory 1% of severance taxes to be redirected to the Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account, commonly called the Rainy Day Account, an account that can provide for emergencies, as was done last year, or for unanticipated tough economic times. Regarding schools, we have built many schools in the last decade. And if my budget is accepted, it will provide roughly $600 million for new schools over the next 5 years. So I have proposed the new coal lease bonus money go into rainy day savings rather than automatically be spent on building new schools. Now, under my proposal, we will continue to save more in the stabilization account. And by doing so, we will strengthen our ability to weather tough times as well as add greatly needed transparency. Healthcare. The implementation of the ACA and associated costs are looming. Despite my strong objection to the ACA, despite my asking the Attorney General to fight the case in the U.S. Supreme Court, it is the law of the land. We now have to play the cards in our hand. We have to make decisions regarding Medicaid expansion and insurance exchanges. Last year, this discussion on state-based exchange was suspended. That and a lack of answers from the federal government mean the federal government will likely run an exchange in Wyoming when exchange starts operating in 2014. But a federal exchange could be temporary because we can choose a state exchange down the road. I want to know if that's the right way to go. We need to make an informed choice. Therefore, one of my budget recommendations seeks $100,000 to assist in the process of deciding what exchange is best for Wyoming. Of course, in addition to the question of the exchange, we have before us the issue of Medicaid expansion. It's a tough question, but we must keep an open mind. We must look at and review the work of Director Forsland, the Department of Health, and other groups that want to weigh in on the issue. I have asked in my budget money for the mandatory expansion, but not for the optional expansion. The mandatory expansion is for those presently eligible for Medicaid, but for whatever reason are not yet on Medicaid, and it will include about 7,000 new children. In preparation for the session, so that we can have a full discussion and debate on this, I asked Director Forsland to prepare a budget asking for the full expansion, both the mandatory and the optional, to evaluate the program on a cost-benefit analysis and to make that information available to all of you. We must make the decision now based upon what is best for Wyoming citizens. Unfortunately, there is no magic wand waving. There is no approach that will extricate us from the ACA. It is upon us, and we must act. Because of the enormity of the law, because so many questions need to be answered and so many federal rules still need to be promulgated, and because legislative spending authority is required, I have not committed the state to the optional expansion. But we have 12 months until 2014 before full implementation. So where do we go? The federal government has recently committed to more flexibility, but they're still trying to put together the many needed rules. I suggest today, now is the time we work on and over the next year preparing. We should continue to seek answers. We should continue to prepare. We should look at what set of conditions we would need to accept an exchange and an expansion package. Let's decide what we want. We may know what we do not want, but what is it we do want? And let's make the pitch to the federal government. In other words, let us try within the law that is upon us to find the best deal, the best fit for Wyoming. To do nothing puts the full brunt of the ACA upon us. Everything will be dictated by the federal government without an opportunity to tailor the law to our needs. Director Forsland is prepared to offer options. This body has the opportunity to develop what we would like to see in that request. Now, perhaps the federal government will not agree to our terms. We can say no if they do not. But it's far better that we express our terms and make a request than to not make a request and get a package without our input. Let's view this as an opportunity for innovation. Wyoming has led before with innovative health care, and we can lead again to find state-specific solutions that are right for us. One of Wyoming's noted historians recently informed me about an organization that existed in our territorial days. Between 1885 and 1889, Wyoming cattlemen and cowboys formed and participated in the Fetterman Hospital Association in the small town of Fetterman at the site of Fort Fetterman. The association has been described as the first cooperative health organization in the country. Cowboys subscribed individually through monthly pay deductions, and cattlemen also subscribed to group memberships for their employees. In return for the subscribing fees, cowboys received a nearly full range of medical services. This is an example of Wyoming leading early in our history to provide health care to a group that needed it. We are challenged again now to find ways to provide access to health care for Wyoming citizens. I believe we're up to the task. Now, one of the concerns I hear about health care is we have too many people not paying a fair share of the services they are provided. That's bad policy. I believe that's a fair concern. The question for us is, does that notion translate to other areas of government? With regard to roads, for example, we should recognize that for every dollar we pay in federal fuel tax, we get $1.60 back. We are subsidized with federal dollars from other states. The flip side of that is when we drive a few miles south into Colorado or other bordering states, we pay more to drive on their roads. Those in Colorado drive a few miles north, and they pay less to drive on ours. In effect, we subsidize out-of-state drivers, and I believe we've subsidized out-of-state drivers long enough for the privilege of driving on our roads. It is a conservative principle to pay as you go, rather than using savings to pay for an ongoing expense. It is a conservative principle to pay as you go rather than creating a debt for others to fix. That is what Congress is doing. That is what they've been doing, creating a debt and deficit for our kids and our grandkids to pay. Not properly maintaining and funding highways today is the same concept. We are creating a debt for those who come after us. We're creating a problem for those who come after us to solve. We need a long-term funding source for roads. Now, a bit of history on this. My first session, I asked this body to divert a portion of severance tax as a long-term funding source for roads. That suggestion was rejected, and saying that understates it by a mile. That suggestion was soundly rejected. Now, some of your members have proposed over the last couple of years a bill to look at the option of toll roads. That too was rejected. And while I'm not a fan of toll roads, I at least supported that idea to take a look at it. That was rejected, and this year the Department of Transportation has asked for $50 million. $50 million in supplemental budget from general funds. I rejected that request. So we're at an impasse. I don't want to continue every year to deplete large amounts of general fund that could be used for education, for savings, for health, for seniors, for the disabled, in order to fund what is one of the most basic functions of government, providing sound infrastructure. There is no sense in talking about economic development if you don't have water, sewer, basic infrastructure. Roads are the backbone for so much of our commerce, our recreation, and our day-to-day living. It is an issue of safety. If we fail to maintain our roads, it's no different than failing to maintain a car or a home. The price goes up, and a higher price will be paid for poor maintenance. That is not a plan for being fiscally conservative. Some of you ask, is there room for improvement and savings within the Department of Transportation? Absolutely. And I'm working with DOT to do just that. Is there sufficient savings to provide the $130 million plus per year that is needed? No. Now, it is easy to talk about those cuts as a concept, and it's certainly easy politically to talk about cuts and how you're going to do that. But if you believe there is sufficient cuts of $130 million plus that can be found to fund roads, I need to see the proposal. What I propose is an increase in fuel tax. And in the alternative, I propose what I proposed 2 years ago, the use of dedicated mineral money. Our highway infrastructure needs attention, and we need action, not more words. We have talked this thing into the ground and haven't moved the needle. And we need to remember, we are not Washington, D.C., we are Wyoming, we get things done, let's get this done. Education. We've been fortunate that as a state, we can identify our priorities and also have the financial means to support many of those priorities. Education is a top priority for me, for this body, and the state superintendent. Wyoming has spent billions in recent years on education efforts. We spend more per student than nearly any other state, but we are not the best in terms of results. Dollars spent without design, without a shared game plan, will continue to be expensive and unproductive. Without a common understanding and shared goals by the Legislature, the Department of Education, and my office, we're working against each other, or at least not with each other. We must be on the same sheet of music, and it is clear we are not. Discussions between the Department of Education, the Legislature, and my office should focus on issues such as high school graduation rates, dual immersion language opportunities, charter schools, career technical education, or how to minimize the potential for school violence. We instead are wasting time and money wrangling with problems that should and can be avoided. Last session, the Legislature, recognizing that we were not headed in the right direction, provided additional duties to my office and LSO to assist the Department of Education. It was a good plan, but it did not work out as we had all hoped. We have seen that siphoning off pieces of the Department of Education leads to inconsistency and to the friction we have seen over the last year. This friction may be regarding accountability, with regard to ACT testing, substituting for PAWS, or how we categorize positions at the Department of Education. We are mired down with disputes that are not necessary. We are frustrated. More important than our frustration, much more important, is that we're not setting the stage for the best education system possible for our children. We've got the funding. We've got the buildings. We've got the great teachers. Now we need to increase high school graduation rates, improve college readiness, and have a long-term path to excellence. We owe it to our kids and to our state. There needs to be a clear message to people, administrators, everyone, that Wyoming will not accept the status quo and that Wyoming will have a predictable, accountable, long-term path to educational excellence. Our state's future literally depends on it because today's students are tomorrow's citizens, workers, and leaders. Parents and teachers do not care about who is to blame. They care about results. As we demand accountability, we ourselves have to be accountable. We want our paper's headlines to speak of results, of innovation in education rather than name-calling or blame or failing grades. It is up to us to do the work to get the headlines we seek. The headline that Wyoming is progressing towards excellence in education. This is the session to get us back on track. There's a lot of challenges ahead, but we also have to remember we've had some great successes. It's been a very good year in many ways. Last year, we made headway with data centers and other business recruitment efforts. With broad public input, we are preparing a state energy strategy, and with the legislature's needed help, we will have an action plan for the responsible development of our natural resources that makes it a priority to balance our energy, our economy, and our environment. We are leading the charge. We undertook state management of wolves and held our first wolf hunt. We joined with other states to encourage the development of natural gas vehicle fleets. We continue to lead the country in state regulation of hydraulic fracturing. We pursued litigation against the federal government to protect our state's interests. And year in and year out, we have great judges around the state who are providing justice to our citizens. Year in and year out, we have a citizen legislature that brings great expertise and common sense to Cheyenne. We saw technology services this past year consolidate into the Department of Enterprise Technology Services, and it's working extremely well. And as we begin the session, we remember our work here is not about us. Our work is not about us or our political careers. It is about our children, our families, and the state we love, and about our future. If past is prologue, we will accomplish all that needs to be done. I thank you for your work. God bless you, and God bless Wyoming.
Joining me for some analysis of the governor's address, we have Reed Eckhart, who is the executive editor of the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle, and Bob Jiha, anchor and a longtime Straight House reporter for KGWN CBS 5. Welcome, gentlemen.
Glad to be here.
Well, to quote the governor, we begin 2013 with optimism. Did you get the sense that was his message?
I always wonder when the governor speaks what he's going to give us. I don't see a lot of optimism in this speech. I don't see any vision. You know, where does he want Wyoming to go? What are his hopes and dreams for Wyoming? What are the hopes and dreams of the Wyoming people? I don't see that here, Bob.
I see a little optimism in the speech, or maybe more hope than optimism, but I don't see that optimism with the legislature. I see there was a news conference today, and legislative leaders in response, and they're very cautious. They're very, very cautious. And can I show you a chart? Can I show you a chart? And I don't know if your people can pick this chart up. But here's a period here. This goes from 1980 all the way to the present. And we're in a period here, they think we're in a period similar from 1987 to 2000. You remember, Reed, Tax Reform 2000. They think we're in that same period where you had slow, rising revenues, but faster growing expenses. And the coffee cans they had out there, they had about, I don't know, maybe $1 billion in coffee cans over those 13 years. They used those to balance the budget. They exhausted those coffee cans. Right?
So sum up the point of your Rossborough chart here.
Yeah, they think we're in the beginning of that period again, maybe for 10 years. And the consensus is, hey, let's cut spending, let's watch it.
Well, you know, I mean, the governor has recommended already budget cuts of over 6%, and he went agency by agency. Do you think in the eyes of the legislature that's simply not enough?
No, I think it's enough. I think what they're talking now, not about a rainy day, they're talking about a rainy season. And I go back to this chart because they're afraid that we're entering this period of flat revenues. You know, read
Go ahead, Bob. I'll follow.
Flat revenues and rising expenses, ongoing expenses. Maybe a third of the expenses is taken up by corrections, the health department, and education, and those keep rising. And what they're getting off the Permanent Minerals Trust Fund, is about 25% of funding state government, and the thing is that the higher expenses go, they can't keep that 25%. So
Yeah, but I mean, compared to other states, though, I mean, Reed, I mean, we're blessed.
Well, let's think about the extra 1% they're putting in the permanent trust fund, for example. That's $135 million per year that they're sticking into that trust fund.
Well, that he's proposed to.
Well, no, that's already going in. That money's already going in. He wants to bring it back out. He wants to put it in the rainy day fund.
Yes.
But I think the bigger thing that concerns me is sort of this doom and gloom mindset that sort of settled in over this legislature. They've had multiple opportunities to build this state over the past decade. They've done nothing virtually beyond Hathaway that I can think of. Roads are falling behind. They put money in the schools because they were forced to by the Supreme Court. They simply don't have a sense of where they're really going here. They know all they want to do is stuff it away someplace and pray it doesn't rain too hard. That's not how you build a state.
you get the sense that they, whenever the 2 months, 3 months before the legislature starts, they cry poor. You hear this this caution.
You know, you hear that from our reader, but they've been this way, Bob, for 10 years. Every time they've had an opportunity to spend money on roads, on bridges, on schools, they have done well at the university. Give them credit for that. They have put good money into the university. But I just don't think there's any sense of where they really want Wyoming to go. And without that, you don't know how to spend your money. So you may as well stuff it away, I guess.
You know, full disclosure, I've only been here a year. I've covered other states. And what I find surprising here sometimes is the amount that gets put away in these long-term funds. I did a little calculation, and there's about $27,000 for every man, woman, and child put away in those various trust funds. And well, I won't call it an obsession, but certainly a heightened concern about continuing to feed those funds when there's present-day needs.
Well, Richard, if I have my way, I'd at least put it into the rainy day fund. I wouldn't be putting it into the PMTF. Right? Certainly, you know, they keep arguing that the PMTF's like a
permanent mineral trust.
Permanent trust fund is like, well, but they argue that it's like a
so
401k
how would you ever
plan.
Get money? How would you ever get money out of that fund?
You can't. Barring constitutional amendment, which has been our argument as a paper for more than a decade. What you're doing is you're taking what you could invest in the state and investing it in savings. Now, if you could make 12% in the stock market or 1% in your savings account, where would you put the money? You'd invest it. These guys don't.
But is that feeding Main Street or Wall Street?
Well, yes, but the 12% comes back to you and me. When we get our 12% return, that's better than 1% out of a savings account. Which is what they're getting.
Legislative leaders say they've tried to broaden the tax base, business-ready communities, but they haven't got the return on that yet. So,
well, you know, I have to say, there was an 800-pound gorilla living here for some time that nobody wanted to talk about in hopes it would just go away. But of course, the election proved that Obamacare is here to stay. And so, as the governor said today, there's no magic wand to solve this. They seem to regard it certainly as a problem, rather than an opportunity to extend health care coverage to the rest of, well, the residents of the state who aren't covered.
I don't think the governor does. I think the governor realizes it's here to stay. It's already been decided by the courts.
Oh, yeah.
And you got to work with it. Now, what are we going to do? How are we going to go forward on Medicaid expansion? Are we going to take the optional? What are we going to do here? Rather than let's just keep pushing back, and wasting time.
But for a long time, of course, they stopped the investigation into, you know, like the statewide hearings that they were having. Those were halted, and they made no planning whatsoever for an eventual health insurance exchange, which now looks like it'll be the federal exchange that we get.
Well, he called for that, though. He called for looking at that as we go forward.
Right. The Medicaid thing is interesting in that we pretty much know now that investing in Medicaid would save money. The health department's offered a study, $42 million saved over 6 years. So we know it's going to save money. So now the excuse is, well, what if Obama doesn't come up with the money? What if the feds don't give us the money? Based upon that, you're never going to get in. If I were a betting man, I bet they don't come in this year, and I bet they don't come in next year either, because it's all about who is in the White House. This isn't about what's good for the people of Wyoming.
What about Tom Forson, health department? Head of the health department says, let's get in.
And
put a trigger, you can get out if they renege. Is there anything wrong with that?
No, I say go.
And after he did that study, too, I mean, he was commissioned to do that study.
Right.
And it came up with, I think, the result that startled a lot of people, but because of the way the system works, it would actually save the state considerable money.
$50 million, they're saying now, that would save the state.
Well, Bob, you did ask the question of I know their biggest concern is, okay, so we get in, we put a trigger in place, and 3 or 4 years down the road, the feds cut the money. Are you willing to take all those people back off the rolls? Right. You know, I say, hey, you know, get in, put the trigger in place, tell them right up front. you may not have this long term, but I think we got to go ahead and get in and save the money. Not only are you saving the $42 million over 6, if you don't get it in year 1, you're throwing away millions of dollars you would have gotten for that the feds would have given the states.
Those
We're probably talking about losses of $25 million.
They don't trust the administration. They don't trust.
The Fed bashing meeting we're talking.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's a lot of hot buttons today that were addressed in some ways. Highway funding. The governor wants a constant, steady source for highway repairs, etc. He's pushing for the 10-cent a gallon increase in the gas tax. You think that looks like an easy road for that? I mean,
easier than I thought before I got here yesterday. You know,
I mean, perhaps they could call it something other than a tax.
Hey, look, I thought to get Democrats, the 12 that you've got in the legislature, Tea Party Republicans lining up against that tax, but for different reasons, of course.
Of course.
But now it looks like there's widespread support for that. In fact, I don't know if it was one of Reed's reporters that had asked, how do you explain to the public, how do you explain that you're going to increase their taxes when you got $1.6 billion in rainy day funds, 5.5 or 5.6 billion in the permanent minerals trust funds, which generates hundreds of millions of dollars every couple of years in interest and dividends? How do you explain it when you raise your taxes? They're calling it a user fee, and you got to be careful on that.
Well, one way he did was by saying that out-of-state drivers would be, you know, shouldering a lot of that cost. So.
Toll roads would have been a lot of out-of-state drivers. That never passed for a couple of years.
Well, Richard, too, I think the thing is that they've got a problem and they've been down-talking this tax now for over a decade. We've been writing in the Tribune-Eagle for almost 13 years it was time to raise the gas taxes. Now we say, well, you can't do it this year because we got too much money. You can't tax people. Can't do it this year because we don't have enough money, so you can't tax people. I get a real laugh out of like a guy like Tom Lubnow suddenly awakening to the joys of a gasoline
Perhaps
tax.
you should change the paper's name to the Cassandra Times.
Well, it's like Rip Van Winkle. They've been asleep for 10 years, so they wake up to the joys of a gas tax. It's needed. We support it.
The payroll tax cut goes away. It's 2%. People have to pay another 2% of their paycheck, plus another couple of bucks at a dime. That's about $2 more every time you fill up $1.50. Is that gonna hurt retail? Is that gonna hurt the economy a little bit?
It might, Bob. But the thing is, let's face it. In Wyoming, this is the lowest taxed state capital in America. Let's say it again. It's the lowest taxed state capital in America.
Minerals companies would disagree with you.
They might, but in terms of what I pay.
We have to move on to education because with the superintendent of education, Cindy Hill, sitting quite close by, the governor saved his strongest language of the address. I'll quote, "We are mired down with disputes that are not necessary. Wyoming will not accept the status quo." He had a news conference afterwards. I asked him, so what are you going to do? And he kicked that little can down the road. Said he was going to dodge that question. Didn't want to say whether he wanted to appoint, you know, the superintendent. But where do you guys see this?
He didn't. Reed's pretty up on this. He didn't mention anybody by name, though. Let's get that.
No, he would not. And
It's
it's very clear there's a dispute between the legislative leaders on education and Cindy Hill. And we can argue all day long who's right or wrong. I have my personal opinion on that. But the solution here, if the state wants to go for a change, you can do a constitutional amendment. We talked about that before we came on air. The other option is that the Constitution does say, legislature has the power to do whatever is necessary to expedite public education in Wyoming. So 2 weeks ago, we recommended that the legislature create a position called CEO of Education, call it what you want, king, emperor, whatever you want to call it, education czar, education czar, that'd be good. That person then could run the school system, and it would hopefully be somebody who has expertise in education, who actually understands how education works, not a politician, who's here remain nameless, but on both sides, really. They're all politicians, but somebody who could run the system from an expertise point of view and not from politics or chasing votes.
Now, we're down to the last minute now, but you go ahead.
Language. I smell lawsuit on something like that, do you? Pretty broad language.
I certainly would imagine if they made the move that the superintendent would file a lawsuit. But I think that's fine. Our perspective is that last year we supported a point of position. We still do. If we had our way, we'd support a constitutional amendment.
All right, now,
this thing's got to clear up.
Okay, well, I'm sure we're going to get to it, but I want to get to this. He wants to spend $250,000, $250,000, on reducing the 18,000 rules that Wyoming agencies have on the books. Basically, too much gobbledygook. What do you think?
have
President
the
Jimmy Carter tried this with paperwork reduction many years ago.
Hey, don't have the legislature meet for about 5 years. That's one way to do it. It won't cost you $250. Actually, you'll make money. No, I'm just kidding. I
think this has become the easy answer for Republicans to say, you know, the economy will go when we kill all the regulations. I'm not buying much of that. Regulations are put in place for a reason. They don't simply spring out of nothingness. You know, somebody abuses their authority and you have to put a rule in place. It's not that the rules ever came first. Somebody did something wrong that had to be controlled.
And that, I'm afraid, is going to have to be the last word because we are, unfortunately, out of time. My thanks to Reed Eckhart and Bob Jiha. We're going to have more coverage on Capitol Outlook Friday night at 7:30, but we're going to close with an excerpt from the State of the Judiciary address, which was delivered by State Supreme Court Justice Marilyn Kite. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
This effort to become more efficient has shown us all how tough it is if we are asked to make future cuts in the future. We have also identified statutes that require us to spend money unnecessarily. For us to make significant budget cuts, this body will have to be prepared to change those statutes. The BJPA, the board again, has recommended legislation to allow us to stop distribution of unnecessary copies of books, to phase out full-time magistrates in our circuit court system where that is appropriate, and to allow district judges to determine what proceedings should be transcribed instead of mandating unnecessary and costly transcripts. Now, some judges have differing opinions about the wisdom of these proposed changes, and I'm sure you won't be surprised to learn that judges have opinions and that they differ. It's sort of like the joke about the Supreme Court justice and the law professor and the trial judge that go duck hunting. Now, under state law at this time of year, they can only shoot a duck. So it's very important that what they shoot is a duck. A group of birds flies overhead. The Supreme Court justice jumps up and says, "I conclude those are ducks. I know this from applying the 6-part 8-factor test established in Goose versus Duck," which she then explains in great detail. By the time she has finished her explanation, the ducks have flown out of range, and she sits down. A few minutes later, a second group flies over, and the law professor stands up and says, "I conclude those are ducks." But the test of Goose versus Duck is ridiculous because it's based on historically oppressed species and ignores the insights of animal behavioral economics. The professor continues to explain all of this in great detail, but by the time he's finished, the ducks have flown away and he sits down. A few minutes later, a third group of ducks fly overhead and the trial judge stands up, squeezes off 3 rounds, blows 3 birds out of the sky, turns to his friends and says, "Gee, I hope those were ducks." We face the same challenges you do in affecting real budget savings. Nobody likes them in their own backyard. So as you hear differing opinions about our proposed budget measures, we urge you to support the Board of Judicial Policy and Administration's efforts to be a good steward of state funds and to make the judicial branch more fiscally efficient. While we're working hard to reduce our budget, we also support the governor's position that while cuts need to be made where appropriate, to do our jobs, we need dedicated, fairly compensated employees. It is the first time in our memory that the governor has included the judicial branch employees in his compensation proposal, and we hope that now and in the future this approach will result in judicial branch employees' salary increases being treated equitably with the rest of state employees. The returning members of this body will remember that 2 years ago, when the executive branch received pay increases based on the market, judicial employees were, I think, unintentionally left out. Based on our Hay analysis, we have sought funds to treat our employees like those of the other 2 branches and have asked the JAC to correct that injustice to judicial employees. Finally, I must report to you a disturbing development in our branch of government this past year. At the end of August, thankfully not while court was in session, a gun was fired into the metal building that houses the Riverton Circuit Courtroom. Entering the wall behind the judge's bench, passing over the defense table and over the area where the audience is seated, and lodged in the wall on the opposite side of the courtroom. The perpetrator was not identified and the investigation continues. This incident made very real the need for our judges, employees, witnesses, jurors, and citizens who use our courts to be safe. As you know, in our state, court facilities are provided by the county governments. The Court Security Commission and the Board of Judicial Policy supported Fremont County's application for emergency state funds for the short-term action of placing large metal containers around that building to protect it from an attack from a distance. But its metal exterior could be easily breached by anyone close to the building. We understand the Fremont County Commission is working on a long-term solution, and if in that effort additional state assistance is necessary, we would urge you to support those efforts. In closing, although there is some natural tension that always exists between the branches of government, Wyoming continues to benefit from the respect we show each other. And in that spirit, I want you to know that we appreciate the leadership of the executive and legislative branches of government and the respect that they have shown us. Our only responsibility is to uphold the laws of this state embodied in our Constitution and in the statutes that you adopt. In my effort to explain what judges do, I was struck recently by the words of United States Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, who, among many other accomplishments, was the chief architect and prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials of Nazi criminals in 1945. His precondition for assisting in that heroic effort was that the defendants be presumed innocent and only convicted by the rule of law. In his opening statement, Justice Jackson said this, that 4 great nations, flushed with victory and stunned with injury, stay the hand of vengeance and voluntarily submit their captive enemies to the judgment of the law, is one of the most significant tributes that power has ever paid to reason. While the work of our judges that we do is in less dramatic circumstances, the fundamental principle is exactly the same. Judges must employ reason through the application of law. In courtrooms all over this state, the men and women of the Wyoming judiciary apply the law every day, whether it be to those convicted of heinous violent crimes or to substance abusers who commit grossly negligent acts or to those involved in domestic disputes fueled by anger or economic distress or sheer human failings. And they do so with dedication and honor, striving at all times to put aside personal beliefs and emotions, as well as popular opinions, to apply the rule of law. We wish all of you well in the work that you do during this next session as you strive to find solutions to the problems and challenges of our state. Good luck and Godspeed.